Welcome to City Inside Out Council Edition. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. How are Seattle's council members working to protect the health of our city as coronavirus cases continue to rise? What relief is available for workers and businesses impacted by this crisis? And how will the COVID-19 outbreak affect Seattle's response to homelessness? Council President Lorena González and Council members Lisa Herbold and Andrew Lewis answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
Stay inside. We could be asymptomatic, we could be carrying it, we could be spreading it. It's important that we stay in place.
First and foremost, obviously, if you have the financial resources to be able to pay your rent, pay your rent.
At many basic shelters, residents sleep just a few feet apart from each other, so it's absolutely impossible for those folks to practice social distancing.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. Welcome to the program, and things will look and sound a little bit different this time around in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Council members Herbold and Lewis and Council President Lorena González connecting with us remotely as we recognize the need for social distancing, but also the need to connect with our city's leadership in a time of crisis. So, Council President González, let me start with you here. You came back early from parental leave to rejoin the council recently. Tell us how coronavirus has impacted you and your family, and also please tell us what you'd like to say to Seattleites who are concerned about what's happening.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for an opportunity to be with you this morning. I really appreciate the Seattle Channel continuing their broadcasting during this period of time. I did make the tough decision to end my maternity leave early. I felt that was an important thing to do in the period of this crisis that we are experiencing. There are many operational questions and policy questions and emergency response related issues that need to be dealt with directly by the City Council. And I'm really pleased to be able to come back and provide some guidance and leadership and be part of this team that is working on this issue. I think for me, the coronavirus is obviously incredibly anxiety producing, but I think as Seattleites, we have an opportunity to do the right thing, which is stay home if we can, to avoid spreading this virus and to keep our elders and our children and the infirm, people with pre-existing conditions safe from contracting this virus. And that's what I'm doing. I'm modeling this behavior by working at home. Yeah. That means juggling an infant and doing it at home. And so I think, I'm sort of dealing with the same challenges that many Seattleites are dealing with, but we can do this.
Sure. Great. Councilmember Herbold, similar question to you. How is COVID-19 affecting you personally? Any sort of message you want to pass along to your constituents in District 1 or across the city?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to echo Council President González's thanks to you for keeping this program going. I have so much admiration for all of the journalists and reporters across the city who are working double time and doing great quality and incredible quantity of work to keep us all informed. It is so incredibly important. So thank you. And thank you to everybody in your profession. So for me, what I find is that really important to really think about this time that we have right now. So many of us have so many hours of our day typically filled with life-sustaining work, whether or not it's multiple jobs, demanding jobs, education, childcare, that I think it's really good to think of this time as an opportunity to do some of the things that we might not always get to do, whether or not that's spending time in your yard with your hands in the dirt, or doing that spring clean, or learning a language, or connecting with family and friends. Our lives are so busy, and this is an opportunity, I think, to get to some of the things on our list that can make our lives more whole in this really, really difficult time.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Lewis, what are your experiences so far with coronavirus? And if you have any message for the people of District 7 or citywide, I'd love for you to share it, please.
Right. I mean, the first thing is, as my colleagues had alluded to earlier, and, Brian, it's great to be on here with you and talk in the middle of this crisis to maintain a certain normalcy in our communication with the public. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
The message that I would relay is that, we got to secure in place. And, I think it's particularly important as a millennial, as a 30-year-old, to spread the word to people in my peer group who may be taking this less seriously. Stay inside. We could be asymptomatic. We could be carrying it. We could be spreading it. It's important that we stay in place. And I think that's a message that hasn't been getting out as much to the young folks in the city, given the publicity around how COVID-19 disproportionately affects folks that have pre-existing conditions or who are older.
Right.
It's important to know that we could be carriers, we could be spreading it. So it's important for us to stay in place just as it is for people who are potentially more vulnerable. I think that's an important message to send out.
Okay.
I have been one of the errand runners for the household here. So I do go out every few days for a walk to, according to social distancing, to get groceries. And
right.
It is important to note, you can still take your walks. You can still go to the store to get essential provisions to get through the crisis, but just make sure that you're maintaining social distancing and that when you are leaving, it really is to get those essential provisions. And that's how I've been getting through this and continuing, obviously, to maintain my office hours as a council member with constituents via telephone and via other mediums of communication.
Right.
I've been very impressed by the resiliency of the people of District 7 to be able to adapt to that. I've gotten a considerable amount of people who have been in touch with my office about ways they can get through the crisis, ways they can get support from the city through the Small Business Stabilization Fund. And I look forward to talking to more of those things as the session goes on today.
We are in a very fluid situation right now. It's important to point out, but I want to focus on what the council is working on right now during the last days of March. Council President González, you sponsored legislation to prohibit evictions, residential evictions, based on non-payment of rent during this COVID state of emergency and for 6 months afterwards. You've also set up a situation where renters can pay rent in installments. We've received a number of questions about this. I'll read a few of them to you from our viewers. Joe wrote in on Twitter. Will there be a rent moratorium? He asks. Patrick also tweeted in. If there's, say, 5 people in the house, but only 2 can pay, what happens if only some people can make the rent in a household? I want to try to clear up what the council's doing here. The message here is not, don't pay your rent for 6 months. Can you help us with this, please?
Yeah, first and foremost, obviously, if you have the financial resources to be able to pay your rent, pay your rent. And secondly, the reason why that's important is because my bills actually do not prohibit evictions. What they do is use the existing just cause ordinance that exists in the city of Seattle to create an additional defense to an eviction that is directly related to the COVID-19 crisis. So if, for example, you are a renter, if you are one of the more than 50% of Seattleites who live in the city of Seattle who rent, and you are experiencing financial crisis as a result of, for example, your restaurant closing or your ice cream shop closing or whatever other non-essential business is closed, and you cannot financially meet the rent during the moratorium or afterwards, then this provides a judge an opportunity to consider those financial hardships if a landlord files a lawsuit to evict you from your apartment. So this builds on much of the good work that folks like Councilmember Herbold have done in the past. It utilizes the Just Cause Ordinance, which is an existing law in the city, and it builds off of the moratorium that was declared by Governor Inslee and Mayor Durkin in our city. Okay. And on top of that, we will have the bill that allows people up to a year in agreement with the landlord. It has to be in a written agreement with the landlord to create a reasonable payment plan to catch up with their rent. Again, only if it is related to the COVID-19 economic that so many people in our city are facing, and I believe there will be some long-term impacts there. And the last thing we want to do is exacerbate housing insecurity and instability in our city.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councilmember Herbold, I wanted to make sure I bring you in because you've worked quite a bit with our city's just cause laws here. And I wanted to make sure I asked about landlords in these situations. We got some emails in about this as well. Roger writes this: what residents having issues need is additional income or forgivable loans to help cover expenses. Housing providers are not banks and should not be expected to do this on their own. Will there be city assistance, funding perhaps, that could go to landlords with this situation? A lot of them are concerned about paying their mortgages because they depend on those rent payments to make that happen.
Both the city of Seattle as well as Washington state government, and there's a program funded by the Mariners called Home Base. All of those programs are programs that landlords and tenants can access when they've fallen behind in their rent. One of the problems, though, is the programs that landlords can access when their tenant has fallen behind on their rent are only triggered when an eviction order has been issued.
Right.
So, given that we have a ban on landlords issuing eviction orders for non-payment of rent, we need to make changes to those programs that allow landlords and tenants to access those rent assistance programs when they fall behind, absent receiving a rent increase. So I've been talking to the mayor's office about the city programs, and I've been working with our Office of Intergovernmental Relations to make sure that this is on our list for discussions with the state as well, because we really need to get those dollars out the door. We need to be able to assess what the need is also. And by allowing landlords to apply for these funds when their tenants fall behind, we're going to get a better idea of what the need is as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilmember Lewis, I want to go to you here because the mayor and council have also passed a measure to try to help prevent commercial evictions, trying to help businesses during the coronavirus crisis here. I know that you're serving on the Small Business Recovery Task Force, and I wanted to talk to you about this, what options businesses owners have at this point. There is a Small Business Stabilization Fund in place, some tax relief available. Break down what's happening and how this is going to help.
We are doing everything that we can as a city to step in and provide relief. There were some great bills that we passed on Monday, one by Councilmember Peterson to provide utility, late payment relief for small businesses and for individuals and nonprofit groups.
Yes.
Councilmember Morales, the chair of the Economic Development Committee, passed a bill to put another $1 million investment into our Small Business Stabilization Fund.
Yep.
So these are big things that we're doing as a city with limited resources. Just to put in a plug for small business owners all over the city, the Small Business Stabilization Fund is really designed for micro businesses. That is to do with the limitations of the federal money that we have access to put into these kinds of programs. That's why it can only apply to what's termed a micro business, so 5 employees or less. We're giving up to $10,000 of relief per micro business that applies in the selected. That's great, but that's not gonna do it for a lot of small businesses that fall outside of that category. The problem is we're restrained by the prohibitions on gifts of public funds, which limits the amount of support that we can give. So most of it does have to be tailored and directed towards these very small businesses. I still encourage all businesses in Seattle that are seeking relief to apply. From my work on the small business task force that I'm serving on with Councilmember Morales, which is being co-chaired by former Councilmember Bruce Harrell and former Governor Gary Locke, that we are hopefully going to be using that data to see if there are other interventions that we can pursue. One thing that I think is particularly promising is we're going to have a lot of federal aid that's going to be coming into the state.
True.
That
money just announced. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right, and that money will not necessarily carry the prohibition on gifts of public funds issue, since the source is the federal government.
Right.
And we know the businesses, from the walks that we take, from our years of living in these communities. We know who the small businesses are that need relief. They're our friends. They're people that we have spent time with, that we've had dinner with, that we've bought coffee from, that we've bought used books from.
Yeah.
And if there's a way that federal money can go to us so that we can then give those grants out to the small businesses, that would be more desirable than the federal government setting up a separate system. So, that's just to say apply so we can get your name in the queue. We're here as a city to try to help. We have limited resources, but, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to get in there and we're going to see what we can do.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the city's response to homelessness during the COVID outbreak here. There was a report last week that said it would cost $260 million in King County alone to shelter all homeless people at least 6 feet apart for proper social distancing. Council President González, the city has been working on opening some new emergency shelters, but respecting the need for social distancing creates a real challenge here. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. I mean, there's no question that the realities of this public health crisis have exacerbated the concerns that I think we've all shared about how we are standing up appropriate shelter for our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. And the challenges still exist, and I think we are doing the best that we can within the limitations that we currently have as a city and as a region to meet those needs. We have not met all of those needs, but I think we did some things in the budget cycle last year that are proving to be useful, like our funding of hygiene centers, which was led by Councilmember Herbold. And really sort of continuing to make sure that we're holding tools like the navigation team accountable to make sure that they are not creating additional harm to people experiencing homelessness and quite literally further causing spread of the virus throughout our community. So I think, we have a lot of work to do here. We, I certainly appreciate the collaboration from the mayor's office on continuing to identify in real time additional new shelter spaces that she's allowed to stand up quickly as a result of the civil emergency that we're facing. And I know that Councilmember Lewis might talk about this, but there'll be a lot of interest in figuring out how we retain those assets in the future on the long term to make sure that we again are meeting the scale of the need and have the capacity we need to help those individuals experiencing homelessness, not just during the coronavirus, but in the long term.
Thank you for setting the table
Brian,
here. Yeah, please,
Brian,
if you want to. Yeah.
I just want to break it down a little bit for your viewers about how important it is to do things like the city has done by opening up an exhibition hall in partnership with the Downtown Emergency Service Center for to allow shelter residents to spread out. People watching the show may not be aware that at many basic shelters, residents sleep just a few feet apart from each other on mats on the floor. So it's absolutely impossible for those folks to practice social distancing under those conditions. And so we must find more space so people can spread out appropriately. A lot of these folks are people who have underlying conditions, are elderly. It's great that we've opened up the exhibition hall for this purpose. It's great that we're working to stand up 3 additional tiny home villages, but we have to do more. I'm really encouraged that the city has been flooded with offers from local hotels to use their empty rooms. That the offers have really been primarily focused on the needs for quarantine and isolation for our first responders, but I really think that we need to also work with those hoteliers to use those empty rooms for this purpose as well. It's critical. After the first rush to open up the exhibition hall and announce the 3 new tiny house villages, there hasn't been another step taken, and it feels like, even though it's just a couple weeks ago, and it takes a long time to do this stuff, and I really appreciate what we have done, it feels like there's been a lot of time has gone by, and when we're talking about this virus that spreads, we can't let more time go by without addressing these needs.
Thank you for bringing that up. Two weeks
hey,
feels
Brian,
like 2 months. Yeah. Go ahead, please, Andrew.
Right. Thank you. I want to echo all the comments that my colleagues just made. I just want to add two really quick points on top of that. I mean, the first thing that I would say, not only as someone who's chairing the Select Committee on Homelessness for the council, but also as somebody who lives in the Uptown neighborhood here in Seattle, in Lower Queen Anne. I live just a couple blocks away from Exhibition Hall. I live less than half a mile away from a planned shelter that King County is going to stand up in Inner Bay, right on the border of Uptown. Yep. I think it's important to point out that, we, in this time of crisis, there's going to need to be shared sacrifice. I am proud as an Uptowner that these assets are going to be put in Lower Queen Anne. It makes all of us safer to be able to have these expanded facilities to allow the kind of social distancing so that all of our neighbors can be in a position where they are safe from getting COVID-19 and in a position where they're not necessarily going to be a higher risk to spread COVID-19. And we need to just make sure and summon the courage as Seattleites everywhere to be supportive of these investments, even if they fall into our neighborhoods. I mean, I have two of them that are going to fall in Uptown, and I'm proud to have those assets put here. The second thing that I want to share really quickly to Councilmember Herbold's point about the hotels, this is something that I mentioned at council briefing on Monday. I'm totally in support. It's something that East Coast cities have done routinely in response to getting folks experiencing homelessness off the street. I got a quote from a hotel owner in my district. I'm not going to say who they are, but I did get a quote from them saying that they would give us rooms at a cost of $95 a night. That is a pretty good price point when you look at some of the other alternatives for where folks who are experiencing homelessness, the other kinds of places where we could put them up for a night. And I just want to make the point that in this climate and in this area, it could also be an economical decision to have vouchers for hotel stays for a brief period of time to get us through the crisis. And it's something we certainly should be exploring as a next step.
Okay, thank you for that. And I know the council is going to be looking into that. I'm going to attempt to pick up the pace ever so slightly, but I know there's a very meaty topic. Council President González, talking about childcare. Seattle Public Schools have opened 12 childcare sites in school buildings, priority going to kids who have first responders in their families. How's the city of Seattle helping with this childcare effort? This is a big deal for a lot of families.
It is. Obviously, we know that childcare needs throughout the city are significant outside of the context of a coronavirus crisis. What we have seen as a result of the coronavirus crisis is that many of our existing childcare providers have shuttered, and so they are no longer providing those services in the context of schools being canceled and people having to telecommute. So I think there is obviously a huge burden on the childcare system that already existed, and we have a responsibility to sort of recognize that even in the midst of this crisis, there are categories of essential workers. Those are first responders, firefighters, police officers, but also healthcare workers,
right?
Also social workers who are providing sheltering services to people experiencing homelessness and others. And they very much still need to be able to rely on a child care system that meets needs. And so we are happy to be able to partner with the Seattle Public Schools on figuring out how we can best utilize their existing space and existing programming and contracts that we have with them to continue to meet these childcare needs. And we have a responsibility to continue to explore outside of the public school buildings, what kind of partnerships we can develop with other childcare providers that we already have contracts with to see if they can step up as well to meet the needs of these essential workers who still need childcare.
Thank you very much for that. Councilmember Herbold, I want to talk about a big issue certainly impacting people in District 1, your district, and throughout the city. I'm talking about the closure of the High Bridge going over to West Seattle for an undetermined amount of time due to some major structural issues. This came as a shock to a lot of people, certainly came as a surprise to me. Full disclosure, I'm a West Seattle resident here. What's going on with this short-term, long-term? What can you tell us?
Yeah, it was a real surprise to a lot of people. I got the call at 11:45 a.m. From the mayor telling me that there'd be an announcement in a couple hours of a 7 p.m. Bridge closure and indeterminate period of time.
Right.
But my goal is really to really figure out what we need to do as a city to get it up and operating as soon as possible. My short-term goal is asking SDOT how soon the lower level, the Spokane Street Bridge, can be open for more than just only emergency vehicles, freight, and transit.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of calls and emails from West Seattleites who are first responders. I've heard from an ER nurse, a firefighter, an immunology researcher at the UW. These are people whose commutes are significantly affected. I've heard from night shift workers who have to be at work at 3 a.m. I want to look to see whether or not we can have some limited lower bridge openings to serve those needs. There's also all the folks up in the north end of the peninsula. It's really difficult for all of those folks to have to either take the First Avenue Bridge or the South Park Bridge to go all the way up to the top of Admiral. So I think maybe looking at some local access to the lower level bridge might be warranted as well. Okay. I also have a lot of questions about how we got to this place. Yeah. And I really appreciate that Council President González has called on SDOT to address the council at Monday morning's briefing, this coming up Monday. I have questions about what the timeline was for the bridge inspections and what's the status of inspections on other bridges. The West Seattle Bridge is one of 69 bridges that were sort of triggered by the change in these federal load requirements. Yeah. And so SDOT had to go out and adjust sort of the load ratings for 69 other bridges. And then with the result of those adjustments that ended up with the outcome of the West Seattle Bridge being inspected more often. How many other bridges are also being inspected more often, and what are the conditions of those bridges? Yeah. I'm also really focused on what we can do in a traffic management way to make during this time to make sure that the streets are handling traffic as well as possible. Yeah. The Holden intersection at Highland Park is already dangerous and getting more traffic. People are asking for a temporary light. Similarly, the 5-way intersection at the Chelan Cafe, a lot of people have written to me saying that signal chiming needs to be changed. Okay. So I want the listening public to continue contacting me about not just the impacts of the closure on your commute, but also with ideas that SDOT can put into place for traffic management during this very difficult time.
Thank you very much for that. We are unfortunately out of time. Councilmember Lewis, I'll let you wrap up here maybe for some last words here, passing on to the public, and this is the 15-second version if you can, how you're getting through. I think a lot of people just have that question. Is it a new addiction to Netflix or what's getting you through these days here? It's challenging for so many people in Seattle. Yeah, well, I'll say this, stay inside. Make sure you have a subscription to a good streaming service, Ryan, as you just mentioned. Yes. Make sure you prioritize a good walk, maybe to a less conventional essential business. I walk down at least once a week to Holy Mountain Brewing in Inner Bay, and I get a couple bottles of locally brewed District 7 beer at Holy Mountain Brewing and bring it back. All right. So put in another walk to your routine. Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and we will see you next time on Council Edition.